difficult accommodation over there because he's at the far end of the island, and in order to get workers to stay over that summertime, he needs to basically provide places for them to sleep.
A couple of people have actually messaged in with a slightly more optimistic take on this, suggesting that perhaps the fact that fewer young people are coming here on working holiday visas is because young people are flying less. Because they're more environmentally conscious. Is that, Victoria,
Nah.
you look like you're sceptical?
Maybe. I mean, I would be really interested to know why, and I'm sure there are some kids that aren't travelling over here because of that reason, but I think the bulk of young people are still quite keen to explore the big wide world.
Interesting. Kathy has actually emailed in, this is on the cruise ship Poultry story we were talking about before. She says, I think this is just another example of how cruise ships don't respect or provide income to the places they visit. Tours are organised on board with all of the money going to the cruise company, and sometimes they even set up markets. I'm not sure that this is true, but sometimes they set up markets on the wharf selling local wares, which are, again, all part of the business of the cruise company. Thanks very much for that, Kathy. Right, it's coming up to 4 minutes to 5, and that means it's time to talk about dogs.
Hurrah!
Warm, fuzzy news for dog lovers in Auckland. Like Victoria, who's actually in Wellington.
I'm not actually.
Dogs of... Oh, is that right? Okay. Dogs of all sizes are now allowed on trains. It's the second phase of Auckland's Transport's Pets on Trains trial. Previously, and for most of the rest of the country, only small dogs and carriers were allowed. However, there are still some rules. Dogs will have to be on leashes and will also have to be muzzled, and other domestic animals will have to remain in their carrier. Damien, what do you reckon? I mean, this means that you can take your dog out on errands. Is that a pretty cool step for our public transport, do you think?
I actually ended up in a bit of a Twitter war on this very topic about 6 months ago. I think the first thing we need to do is make sure that our public transport is suitable for people. I think people first. I think there are a lot of people who are scared of dogs. There are people who have allergies to dogs. Yes, Ellie's just messaged me in my headphones saying she's one of those.
Yeah.
And I think, but I'm willing to admit that the compromise should be, so it's at the moment it's outside of peak times and on the weekends when if you've been on an Auckland train, most of the time they're pretty empty around there. But have it the end carriage, be it the far end carriage. All dogs can go in there, so those other people can travel without fear, without their allergies, without any risks. I think there's just a free for all might be going a bit too far. But I think it's great that people can take their dogs on trains because I understand that not everyone has access to vehicles and can especially if you need to take your dog to the vet or something like that.
Victoria, we've got about a minute left. What do you think?
Well, I'm allergic and I don't like dogs, and so I'm pretty anti it, but I like those value add suggestions that Damien's proposed about maybe the end carriage. What has befuddled me is there doesn't seem to be any rules around whether or not dogs can go on seats. Like, I don't want to sit on a seat that a dog's been on if there's dog fur and stuff like that. And what happens if it's full? Does a dog give up its seat for me?
No, I think yes. So I think the human gets the seat over the dog.
I don't want public transport to start smelling like the cars that people who have dogs smell like. Everyone's been in one of those cars. They're gross.
You wouldn't be too happy if you just sat down next to someone who's taken their Great Dane for a trip to the beach, would you?
God, no.
Yeah, interesting. Alrighty, well, we'll keep an eye on it and see how it goes. Thank you very much indeed. It's been a very interesting panel. Victoria Stewart, thanks for your time.
Thanks, Emil. It's been great to be here.
Damien Christie, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Emil.
And thank you, audience, for all of your great texts and suggestions. We'll be back from 3:45 rather, tomorrow. And now, here's Checkpoint.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E Haere nei, an unvaccinated Samoan toddler flies home into a raging measles outbreak after being denied the jab at an Auckland clinic. The death toll in the island nation hits 55 as traditional healers continue to defy the ban on public gatherings to dish out alternative treatments. Our top health official warns families with young kids to seriously reconsider any travel plans to infected areas. The government moves to ban all foreign donations over $50 with a little help from National, and more than 500 gun owners' details have been exposed in a police privacy breach. But exactly how many people saw them? And the transparent zone packed with $1 million. Yep, a throne. RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata with DNA. The government is proposing to make it legal to buy a maximum of 14 grams of cannabis a day. That's one of the proposals in legislation unveiled this afternoon by the Justice Minister Andrew Little. A draft bill has been released for all political parties to provide feedback on as the first step towards next year's cannabis referendum. The bill also includes a minimum legal age of 20 for the purchase and use of the drug and controls to ensure the potency of products is regulated. Mr Little says the products like cannabis lollies are unlikely to end up being approved.
I would be very surprised, given the way we've drafted the legislation, that any regulator would think that sweets, lollies, toffees and things attractive to young people would be permissible.
Andrew Little says his aim is to have the final draft bill available by early next year. A Samoan toddler has been flown back to Apia without being vaccinated because doctors in Auckland wouldn't give him the necessary jab. The 15-month-old boy's family had been visiting New Zealand and he stayed on with his godparents because his parents did not want him returning to Samoa amid the measles outbreak. But today he flew back with his godfather, Mark Went, who says an Auckland clinic refused to immunise him because he didn't have a New Zealand passport. Mr Went says they're worried for the toddler's safety in Samoa, where most of the 55 people who have died from measles have been young children. The Otago Daily Times has apologised for publishing a cartoon that jokes about the measles outbreak. Garrick Tremaine's cartoon shows two people walking out of a travel agent and one saying that the least popular spots right now are the ones people are picking up in Samoa. There's been online outrage with people saying the cartoon is racist and heartless. The paper says its content and the timing were insensitive. The ACT leader David Seymour is denouncing the government's move to rush through legislation to ban foreign political donations of more than $50. The bill requires political party secretaries to ensure sums larger than that come from a New Zealand donor. But Mr Seymour says it won't achieve anything.
All of the workarounds that some people may be using are unchanged because the definition of an overseas person and a New Zealand person are the same. The only thing that's changed is the quantity of money. And by making it $50, it's going to be a nightmare for political parties to comply with because every time you get a $51 donation, you've got to find out where the person lives.
David Seymour says putting the bill through under urgency exclude the public from having a say at select committees. The severe northerly storm that battered the Wellington region today has left a trail of damaged trees, power poles and ripped-off roofs. It's also affected many flights in and out of Wellington Airport. This stranded passenger, Jodie, has been trying to get home to New Plymouth since 7:30 this morning.
I'm just waiting still, but I think it's not going to go, so I'm stuck here for the night, looks like. It would be good to get home today, but it's not going to happen. I've just been down in Dunedin for the week, so I've got things to get back to up there.
A Singapore Airlines flight from Melbourne was forced to divert to Christchurch, where passengers had to stay on the plane on the tarmac for several hours. It's due to make another attempt to reach the capital shortly. In the South Island, southern lake levels have been rising following heavy rain, and Queenstown and Wanaka are on high alert. Lake Wakatipu is also high, and warnings have been issued to people living in low-lying areas. A Helensville chicken farm where 190,000 birds died over the weekend did not proactively tell the Ministry for Primary Industries anything had happened and only did so after being dobbed in. The chickens either overheated or suffocated to death after a power outage cut the air supply in their barns. The Ministry's Compliance Director, Gary Orr, says the company involved did not alert MPI at the first opportunity.
We were made aware of it through third party, and it was only after we were provided that information and reached out to the company that they then confirmed. So that's going to be part of another conversation we'll be having.
Gary Orr of the Ministry for Primary Industries. 5 women have said in legal proceedings that Prince Andrew was present during massages they gave to the convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein and his guests. The sworn statements to a US court have been revealed in a BBC Panorama programme containing an interview with Virginia Giuffre, who alleges that at 17 she was trafficked to Britain and then had sex with the prince.
It was a wicked time in my life. It was a really scary time in my life. I had just been abused by a member of a royal family. So when you talk about these chains, I wasn't chained to a sink, but these powerful people were my chains.
Virginia Giuffre, Prince Andrew has categorically denied having any relationship with her. A cruise ship company whose non-Māori crew members put on a pōwhiri for tourists wearing fake moko and tribal skirts has agreed to talk with Tauranga Iwi about it. Images of the incident drew widespread criticism online, prompting Princess Cruises to issue an apology. After initially ignoring requests from the iwi to meet, the company has today agreed to talk with representatives of Ngai Te Rangi to ensure it doesn't happen again. It says it's determined to build a positive relationship with iwi and hapu in the wake of the disappointing incident. It's 5:05. Rain has washed out the final two sessions of the second cricket test between New Zealand and England, and the match has ended in a draw, giving the hosts a 1-0 series win. New Zealand were 241 for 2 in their second innings and leading by 140 when rain forced the players from the field. When the game was called off, Ross Taylor was 105 and captain Kane Williamson was 104. Williamson has praised his players' efforts in the game.
From our guys' perspective, it was just great to see the fight, the attitude that, at times when nothing was happening, that guys kept sort of wanting the ball in their hand and trying to take those wickets, which were quite tough to come by with such a strong batting unit in that of England.
Kane Williamson. The Hurricanes are playing for the possibility of losing their head coach to the All Blacks, planning for the possibility of losing their head coach to the All Blacks. John Plumtree is reportedly in line to become one of Ian Foster's assistants should Foster be appointed All Blacks coach. Hurricanes CEO Evan Lee says he's not going to get involved in speculation, but they have to be ready if Plumtree moves on.
We've obviously got a succession plan internally, and we would also, be prepared to go to the market for 2020 or possibly 2021 in a more long-term solution.
Evan Lee. Argentina's Barcelona forward Lionel Messi has won football's prized Ballon d'Or award for a record 6th time, and the US midfielder Megan Rapinoe won the Women's Award after helping her country retain the World Cup. That's the news.
Social lives in disarray as schools ban cell phones.
I've already got my phone taken off me twice.
So you're not out there playing sports and all that sort of thing and borrowing balls from the gym?
No, not really.
You'd rather be on your phone?
Yeah.
What are you doing on your phone though?
Texting people that are usually at the school.
Are they right next to you? Maybe you could just talk to them?
Yeah, maybe.
We're not saying cell phones are bad, and we're not saying that going cell phone free is a panacea, but I suppose the way we sold it was, we just want to give you some time out.
The Art of Conversation. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Then on 9 to noon, Ports of Auckland's boss Tony Gibson on what he says is the real cost of moving the port. And after 10, best-selling author Simon Griffin takes a light-hearted look at good manners and life's biggest irritations. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Warnings and watches are in force for heavy rain and northerly gales for parts of southern and central New Zealand. For Northland, Auckland, Coromandel Peninsula, Waikato, Waitomo, Bay of Plenty, Rotorua, Taupo and Taumarunui. Scattered showers turning to rain for a time this evening with brief heavy falls and possible thunderstorms. Norwesterly strong for a time, easing. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Taihape and Wairarapa, including Tararua District, a period of rain tonight, then becoming fine. Strong norwesterlies, gale in exposed parts of Taihape and Wairarapa. Taranaki, Whanganui, Manawatu, Horo, Whenua, Kapiti Coast and Wellington. A few showers turning to rain for a time from late morning and afternoon. Northerly gales in exposed places easing by tonight. Nelson and Marlborough, rain with heavy falls clearing. Isolated showers tomorrow. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, periods of heavy rain with squally thunderstorms and hail. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, heavy rain, thunderstorms near the main divide, occasional rain elsewhere. However, mostly fine for the Canterbury Plains and North Otago. Chatham Islands, occasional rain or drizzle. Mostly fine tomorrow. RNZ National, it's coming up to 5:09.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The cannabis referendum and a ban on foreign donations to political parties coming up. But we begin tonight back in Samoa, where an unimmunised toddler has landed this afternoon after being refused a measles vaccine here in New Zealand. The 15-month-old boy had been visiting New Zealand with his family, but was denied a vaccine at an Auckland medical clinic because he didn't have a New Zealand passport. His parents, fearing for his health, left him here with his New Zealand godparents, but this afternoon they took him home with everyone hoping for the best. It comes as the death toll in Samoa rose by 2 overnight to 55. Our cameraman Nick Monroe and reporter Nita Blake-Person spoke to the boy's godfather Mark Wendt at Auckland Airport and started by asking who he was travelling to Samoa with.
My wife, my godson and my daughter.
How old are those kids?
My daughter is 9. My godson is just 15 months.
And what are their immunisation records?
My daughter's up to date. My godson couldn't have his because he was younger than 15 months when we came over. So we wanted to get him immunized here, but we tried. Couldn't.
Why not?
They refused and said that because he was a Samoan citizen, they couldn't give him immunization. We had all his records. There was a photo was sent to us. We gave it to the doctors, and they said that they couldn't do it.
And are you worried heading back over?
Yeah, of course. I mean, my godson, I still feel for him. And he's right well within the age bracket of those who are dying at the moment. So basically, he's on home detention when he gets back. We've already instructed our family to clean all the car up. We'll get him straight into the car and go straight home, and that's where he'll be until this all blows over.
Did you consider not taking him back?
Yes, he was actually supposed to travel originally with his parents last week on Wednesday, and they had fears that he would, contract the measles because he hasn't been immunized. But they said that they asked if we could stay with him for a week, see how it all went. Obviously, the death toll's gone up, and now they're really worried, and so are we. So we tried to get him immunized over the last week, and we couldn't. Last trial was yesterday, and they said no.
So you're just hoping now?
Yeah, just hope for the best. Go back home and put him in home and just see what happens from there.
Do you have any messages for that doctor here?
Yeah, a little bit disappointed. My daughter and I and my wife are New Zealand citizens, so I'm not sure how much weight that has, but I guess because he's on a Samoan passport and he's our godson, they can't do it. And I kind of understand the precautions that are there with injecting them incorrectly or whatever, but we had records he could have tried something.
And that was Mark Wendt talking to Nita Blake-Person. The Ministry of Health warns passengers to think carefully about travel to areas infected with measles, including Samoa, Tonga, Fiji and the Philippines. A short time ago, I spoke with the Director General of Health, Dr. Ashley Bloomfield, and asked if he would take an unvaccinated child to any of those places.
I certainly wouldn't be going to Samoa with a young child. I think anyone going to Samoa at this point in time should think, or planning to go, should think very carefully about delaying their travel. And they should certainly ensure they are vaccinated, and any child from 6 months of age onwards can be vaccinated with measles, mumps, rubella vaccine.
But you would advise against taking any young child who was not vaccinated into Samoa?
I would at this point in time. There's quite clearly a very large outbreak. The last thing we want to do is to add to the problem in Samoa, and of course we're also seeing the odd case now coming back into New Zealand from Samoa.
We have encountered at the airport a young child who was travelling on a Samoan passport who is aged in that most vulnerable age group, so under the age of 4. Would there be any reason why they couldn't be permitted to get a vaccine here in New Zealand before heading back to Samoa?
So children under 18 are eligible for publicly funded vaccinations regardless of citizenship or immigration status in New Zealand, and so they should be seeking getting a vaccination through a general practitioner.
So if you were from Samoa, you're here visiting family or you're on holiday or whatever, you can go to a GP and get your child vaccinated for free, is it?
At this point in time, yes, absolutely.
Generally, who's eligible to get vaccinated at the moment in New Zealand?
Well, we're encouraging and focusing on children. In the Auckland region, anyone from 6 months of age upwards and up to 15. But in terms of people travelling to the Pacific, and in particular Samoa, anyone 6 months of age up to 50 should be vaccinated before they go.
I just want to go back to this idea that you can get a vaccination even if you're visiting from Samoa. We know explicitly of a case of a 15-month-old child who's on a plane right now heading back to Samoa who is not vaccinated. Despite going to a medical clinic and asking for a vaccination, they were turned away.
So what we can do then is make sure that we're letting all our medical clinics and GPs know, and just reiterating the information is out there, and we will reiterate it that regardless of citizenship or immigration status, children under 18 are eligible for publicly funded vaccinations on the immunisation schedule.
So do you think that some GPs here are unaware of that they could be turning people away?
Well, it's possible, and you cited an instance, and the thing that it's beholden us to do then is ensure we're making sure that information is reiterated to all general practices. We have channels for doing that, and we will make sure we do a follow-up on that.
So we've got a kid in a packed plane about to arrive in Samoa. I mean, well, what should that family do?
Well, the family should be ensuring that they keep that child isolated, because remember at the moment in Samoa...
On a plane or...?
Yeah, well, it's a bit hard on a plane, but once they get there, all children in Samoa we know are being encouraged not to be taken around to events because they need to be protected. So I can't speak to that particular individual case, but what I can say is that as a ministry, we will just reiterate to all our general practitioners out there, who, by the way, are doing a fantastic job, that actually these children, if they're under 18, are eligible.
So also we've had queries about why there seems to be no warnings or screenings or health messages about measles at the airport. Is that the case, and why would that be?
Well, there's very significant media, of course, around measles, both the outbreak that we've had here in New Zealand over recent months, but also about Samoa. And so I think there's a high level of awareness. There's a very high level of awareness around the country. And the reason we don't have any screening at airports is that people can be symptomatic for several days and can take asymptomatic, that is, so no symptoms, but have or be brewing measles and be contagious. So it's not going to pick up everybody who might have measles who are travelling. The key message here is if people are travelling to the Pacific, in particular Samoa, Fiji or Tonga, then they need to get vaccinated and allow 2 weeks for that vaccination to take effect.
So would you have to show a vaccination certificate either inbound or outbound?
People should be aware that some countries, and in particular American Samoa and Tokelau, are currently requiring people to show proof of vaccination against measles to be allowed to enter the country. So they should consult the Safe Travel website to make sure they've got the latest information. Again, all this does is reiterate the point that if they're not immunised, they need to get immunised before they go. And my strong advice would be at this point in time, if you can, defer any travel to Samoa until the measles outbreak there is under control.
So defer it until this is passed, regardless of whether your children and you are vaccinated?
Look, I think if you're vaccinated, then there's a much lower risk, but people should also be aware where there's a high prevalence of measles in the community, even fully vaccinated people can still get measles. And so they should just think very carefully about the option of deferring their travel plans at this point in time. Another good reason is there will be a lot of pressure on the Samoan public services at the moment, and they just need to make sure that they're giving the Samoan government and the health system there a chance to get on top of the measles outbreak.
Is it likely that New Zealand transmitted this measles outbreak to Samoa?
Well, the first infection in the country has to come from somewhere. We know there's a lot of travel between New Zealand and Samoa, and we know that the highest rates of measles infection during our outbreak have been in South Auckland, where there is a high Pacific population. Our first cases, in fact, all our cases have been imported from the Philippines, the evidence suggests. So the Samoan Director General of Health did say that he felt the first case in Samoa was someone who had come from New Zealand. And now, of course, they've got a much wider outbreak, remembering that in Samoa they had much lower vaccination rates than we have in New Zealand. So that's how they've ended up with a much bigger outbreak. We can perhaps lose sight of the fact that measles and many other vaccine-preventable diseases are not at all trivial. They can be life-threatening in young children. That's why we vaccinate against them. Measles, mumps, rubella vaccine is extremely safe. It's widely used, and I just strongly encourage all parents to vaccinate their children. And again, just that key message, anyone travelling to the Pacific, particularly Samoa, Tonga and Fiji, to ensure they are vaccinated at least 2 weeks prior to travel.
And that's our Director General of Health, Dr. Ashley Bloomfield. Meanwhile, as Samoa struggles to deal with the deadly measles epidemic, people are flocking to a traditional healer in desperation. Last week, the government repeatedly shut down a man claiming to have a medical degree and claiming to heal the disease with his special Kangen water. The Prime Minister of Samoa has threatened to jail people who discourage vaccination and promise healing by alternative methods. But there is a long history of natural healers in Samoa, and not all of them are making wild claims about cures. Today, Checkpoint was invited inside the home of a traditional healer who's been operating for 40 years. Logan Church and Alex Perrottet with this exclusive report.
On the main road that connects Samoa's north and south coasts is a small whale. It's the home of healer Maria Amituanai. In the middle of the small front room she sits, with parents and sick children crammed into every corner. They're also lined up outside, standing in the yard, sitting on stools, sick babies waiting for treatment. She told us she was trained as a healer by her mother 40 years ago. Her words are translated by a customer who swears by her methods.
The treatment is passed down through her grandparents, and she got it out of her grandmother, and that's how she became a traditional healer. And traditional healer doesn't really go to university to acquire one. It's usually passed down through generations.
As we talk, more and more people arrive, bringing sick children of all ages. Many here have the symptoms of measles, the rash and the watery eyes. Maria is spreading a grainy paste over the children's bodies, derived from crushed plant leaves. She also has a liquid she is spooning into their mouths. She won't name those because she doesn't want to give away her family's treasured and secret recipes. Among those who are arriving here is Asinati Falute, who is here hoping to get healing for her 1-year-old daughter Mariam. Her 3-year-old son Coxon got better after coming here. They have the same symptoms.
Swollen eyes, red swollen eyes, and the mouth as well, and he had red spots all over his body. And so we brought him here, and that's all I said. She massaged him first, and then she applied leaves on him. And then about a week, and he was cured. Yeah, and so I'm hoping the same for this one.
But Asinati believes that her children don't have measles.
She's not claiming that this is measles. She said this is some sort of, I don't know how to say it in English, but she said this is some sort of moo in Samoa, and the fever caused by another disease called supavai. And so, but she's not claiming it's measles.
It is clear the symptoms are the same. And the question is, are these parents being told to also get their children vaccinated? Asinati did so, but we couldn't confirm that with everyone. While we were here, we saw almost no one wearing masks. There is also a nationwide emergency ban on gatherings of children. Another so-called healer who earned the ire of authorities last week was Fritz Aliasa, who was claiming Kangen water could cure measles. His clinic was shut down after defying that, but reopened, again and again. His clinic is now silent following a media storm where he attacked journalists and tried to shut them down. Police are now investigating. But Maria says she is doing something completely different from Fritz, and her claims are not so wild.
She's encouraging to see the doctors as well and take medications that the doctors are giving out. Especially the paracetamol for the young children, and she's encouraging them as well to drink coconuts as the Ministry of Health are encouraging everyone that has measles to drink. She's not discouraging any health sector or any doctors from what they're doing. She's just lending out her helping hand to assist in the time of crisis in Samoa, so that she could be able to assist us.
She says she is not deceiving people. She just has a different name and interpretation of what everyone else is calling the measles.
She's explaining that the sickness is unlike measles. It's true that the use of that is to bring down the fever, and where she believes that the sickness that she's curing is one of the common disease that's going on in Samoa. But the way she's treating it is the treatment that she's giving them helps the fever to come down and helps the throat.
Debate over vaccination has raged in Samoa ever since 2 children died on Savaihi last year after botched vaccinations. 2 of the nurses responsible are in jail. But the Samoans have practiced traditional healing methods for generations. And that is a challenge for health authorities as they gear up for 2 days of an immunisation push that will include almost all government employees and departments. But they are fighting against other competing messages online, where influential people from overseas are claiming vaccinations aren't safe. An Australian Samoan blogger has likened the compulsory vaccination program to Nazi Germany, while influential former rugby player Eliota Foemano Sapulu has claimed the vaccines are dangerous. The World Health Organization has directly linked anti-vaccination messages to the spread of measles worldwide. At a nearby district hospital, we asked Kiwi doctor Scott Wilson about local treatments.
Alternative therapies, mainstream medicine typically doesn't really have a particularly strong view on them, as long as they're not to the detriment of patients' care. So as long as people aren't being taken advantage of financially or being given false beliefs. Some of them do have a basis in science. A lot of our medications do come from plants and things like that. Look, it would be inappropriate for me to comment further, but I would stress to parents, look, if they're running high fevers, they have signs of pneumonia, if they have signs of severe infections, that they need antibiotics.
Before we left Maria's Whale, we asked her if she charged any money. She said no. But some satisfied customers who have the means have been making donations. And the line here continues to grow. Many will be back here after work to bring their children for more treatment of their symptoms.
The treatment that she's giving them helps the fever to come down and helps the throat to be better from the sore throat. So that liquid medicine that she's giving him now, it's helping the throat, because that's why most of the children's mouths are like burning.
They are just desperate for their kids to get better.
And you can watch Alex and Logan's story on our Checkpoint Facebook page and the RNZ website, and we'll hear more from them in Samoa after 6. It is 28 after 5, and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen for your feedback on that issue. Are you thinking of travelling to Samoa? Do you have young kids? We heard from the Director General of Health there that is advising people to reconsider travel or defer it if you can. Let us know what your plans are. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. The government is proposing to make it legal to buy a maximum of 14 grams of cannabis a day. That's one of the proposals in legislation unveiled this afternoon by the Justice Minister, Andrew Little. Voters will be asked a simple yes/no referendum question at next year's election. And if the majority say yes, then Parliament will pass legislation accordingly. Mr Little has just held a press conference, and our political reporter Joe Moyer joins us now from Parliament. Joe, what's in the draft bill, and is it likely that some of it will end up changing at all?
Yeah, hi Lisa. So what we've seen from the bill today is that it includes a minimum legal age of 20. Now that's for purchasing and using cannabis. It also has things like controls to ensure, for example, the potency of products is regulated, and quite tight controls and regulations on that side. Now, what it's also allowing for is a state licensing regime of cannabis-infused products. Now, this goes into the territory of things like edibles, which have obviously been quite controversial in some other countries. Now, Mr Little did say today that he very much doubts that the regulator would actually go ahead with allowing edibles like lollies and sweets, your sort of gummy bear things that often come up for debate. He says that's because the principles that the regulator is going to be bound to is really concentrating on minimising harm, and in particular for young people. So they're not going to want to have anything that's sort of targeted at young people in particular. Now, there will also be a limit on the total amount of cannabis that can be grown under a licence. And you talked at the start there about that 14 grams, which basically 14 grams a day has been kind of said to be a regular user's quantity, but it's also actually half the limit provided for in the Canada model, which is being used a lot to sort of work out this legislation. Now, it won't allow for consumption of alcohol and cannabis on the same premises. And in terms of what you can have in your home, it's going to be 2 plants per person or 4 plants per dwelling. And the basis for that, Mr Little said, is that that's kind of sustaining a reasonably low intake for people.
So what happens between now and the referendum?
So on Thursday, we're going to see the cross-party group get together for the first time. Now, that has representatives from every political party here in Parliament, and they're going to have an opportunity to provide feedback on the bill at that point. We've also got an education campaign that's going to be rolled out. Now, a website went live today, and the basis of that website is to provide factual and impartial information on both cannabis and the end-of-life choice bill. Now, remember, next year at the election, we're going to have 2 referendums. We're going to have the cannabis referendum, and we're also going to have that euthanasia referendum as well. So this website's been set up for information on both of those. Andrew Little hopes to have a draft bill sorted by sort of the end of March, early April next year, but obviously he needs to get through that sort of cross-party group and take into consideration all of those changes. If the referendum, of course, is successful, then legislation will be passed and that will come into law. If it's not successful, then the status quo will continue.
And so what's National had to say about all of this?
So we've just spoken with Paula Bennett. Now, she's the National Party's drugs spokesperson. She has quite a number of serious concerns about what she's seen. She's frustrated that the cross-party group hasn't actually met at this point and all of this information has come out before they've actually had an opportunity to talk about it. She's been particularly concerned around things like drug driving and how you sort of regulate around that. And she also thinks that 14 grams a day that you can use and purchase is quite high. She'd like to see that come down a bit as well. Now, there is going to be a fit and proper person test for those who are actually able to supply cannabis. Andrew Little didn't actually rule out today when we spoke to him whether a member of a gang would be a fit and proper person. Paula Bennett says that's very concerning and wants to talk more about that as well with the cross-party group. At this point, she says on what she's seen, she doesn't think she'll be able to vote for it, but of course she needs to talk to her National Party caucus and they need to decide what changes they might put forward.
Thanks, Joe. That's Joe Moyer joining us live from Parliament. And coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, just how many people were able to access personal details in the gun buyback security breach? The police say only 1. Firearms owners say more. What led to the death of 190,000 chickens at a poultry farm in Auckland? And the iwi proposing to buy part of Auckland's waterfront if the port moves north. Now, we'd love to hear from you about anything you've heard so far on the program this evening. And I want someone to get in touch. You can text me on 2101 or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. 14 grams of cannabis, that's the suggested maximum that you'll be able to buy under this legalisation bill. How much is 14 grams of cannabis? Tell me, how many joints is that? They're saying it's a regular user's quantity. So give me some clues here. 2101 on the text, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. We're a little late with the headlines, but here's Susanna.
The government is proposing to make it legal to buy a maximum of 14 grams of cannabis a day. That's one of the pieces of legislation unveiled this afternoon by the Justice Minister, Andrew Little. A draft bill has been released for all political parties to peruse as the first step towards next year's cannabis referendum. The bill also includes a minimum legal age of 20 for the purchase and use of the drug and controls to ensure the potency of products is regulated. Andrew Little hopes to have the final draft bill available by early next year. The Health Ministry is reminding doctors all people under 18 years old can get a free measles jab in New Zealand, regardless of their citizenship. A Samoan toddler has been flown back to Apia without being vaccinated because doctors in Auckland wouldn't give him the necessary jab. The 15-month-old boy's family had been visiting Auckland, and when he was about to return, a local clinic refused to immunise him because he didn't have a New Zealand passport. The severe northerly storm that battered the Wellington region has left a trail of damaged trees, power poles and house roofs. At the height of the storm, the capital's double-decker buses were ordered off the roads and citizens were advised to stay in their homes and not travel unless absolutely necessary. Gusts of up to 150 kilometres an hour were recorded in parts of Wellington, and high winds also caused flight cancellations and delays at the city's airport. And levels of southern lakes have been rising following heavy rain, with the towns of Wanaka and Queenstown on high alert. Both lakes, Wanaka and Wakatipu, are high and rising, with people on low-lying areas warned they may have to move. 5 women have told lawyers that Prince Andrew was present during massages they gave to the convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein and his guests. The sworn statements to a US court have been released by the BBC in a programme containing an interview with Virginia Giuffre, who alleges that she was trafficked to Britain at the age of 17 and then had sex with Prince Andrew. The Prince has categorically denied any such relationship. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just tuning in, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. It's time for us to get to the business news now with Madison Reedy. Hi, Maddie.
Hello.
The government-appointed Small Business Council has released its strategy. So what are they saying? What do we need to do?
Well, the council went out to businesses and asked what they wanted the government to do, and they found that businesses say they want to be better understood. They want more time back. They also want the burden of compliance and the cost of it to be significantly reduced, and they also want better access to finance. At the moment, small businesses heavily rely on banks for their major source of money, and sometimes that means that they have to put their own home and property up for collateral as part of a loan. And the angel investment market, which funds early stage startups and entrepreneurs, is relatively small in this country too. Now, businesses have said that they're struggling to find and hire and retain the right staff, also to invest in training and development, because that takes time and certainly a bit of money too. And they're also struggling to keep abreast the major changes in technology and the continued changes in consumer needs. So the Small Business Council came up with 20 recommendations for the government, and they tabled that in July, but it was only just released this week. Now, among those recommendations were things like a credit guarantee scheme. Now, they want the government to implement one of those, which would essentially mean that the government would need to fork out for a portion of a small business's loan to be repaid to a bank if a small business went under and they faulted on that loan. Other ideas were like a small business growth fund, also a transition fund to help fund businesses growing through periods of challenge and change. Also a technology credit to help them buy some technology to keep up with changing things there. Among the more kind of interesting recommendations were a burden hunter unit. That's actually what they called it, which would be a dedicated policy unit to point out compliance costs and unnecessary red tape. Also a service, a tax advocacy service to help businesses in their disputes with the Inland Revenue Department. Now, the government obviously had about 5 or so months to look over these recommendations and decide what to do with it. They're actually only picking up and running with one of the major recommendations, which is to have agencies, government agencies in their own departments, pay small businesses that they contract work to faster, so they don't want them to be without money owing to them from the government for too long. Now, I spoke to the chief executive of the Ice House. His name's Andy Hamilton. The Ice House is a sort of startup business consulting and advisory firm. He was also part of the council, which authored this report, and he said that he's not disappointed that the government is actually looking to move most of these recommendations to a longer-term working program. He's pretty confident that they will pick up and run with them eventually in time.
Okay, so Vector is selling its gas treatment plant in South Taranaki. What's the deal there?
Yeah, so Todd Petroleum Mining, you may have heard it's part of the Richlist family-owned Todd Corporation, which is a big energy group. They're buying this gas treatment plant in Kapuni off Vector, which is the Lines company. Now, Todd already actually has the licence to extract petroleum products from the Kapuni gas field, and they also have some extraction assets nearby the site as well. Now, 60 of Vector's staff who currently work at this gas processing treatment plant will now transfer to work for the Todd Corporation. And what's going to happen is that Vector and the Todd Corporation are going to drum up a new sort of supply deal for Vector so that it can still access long-term supply to these LPG and gas products. But interestingly, Vector and Todd have actually been at war in the courts for decades now over this particular gas field, particularly over pricing and competition. There's actually still 2 outstanding legal disputes between them. So Vector's Chief Executive Simon McKenzie said today that this deal essentially is them resetting their relationship together. And what they're going to do is actually settle those 2 outstanding disputes and finally put an end to this long-running, complicated litigation they've had between them.
Okay, let's take a quick whip around the markets.
The NZX Top 50 Index, that closed down tonight, so no record high, I'm sorry. It fell 0.7%, which is 74 points, to close at 11,228. The New Zealand dollar, that's buying at 65 US cents, actually just slightly over, 95.2 to the Australian and 50.3 British pence.
Thanks, Maddie. Madison Reedy there with our business update. The government is moving under urgency in the House to ban foreign political donations of more than $50. The move was only announced this afternoon, but the government will be looking to hold all 3 readings of the bill today, meaning it will also skip the select committee stage where the public can give their feedback. Here's political reporter Charlie Drever with the details.
Currently, political parties have to publicly report any overseas donation of more than $1,500. But under new rules, all foreign donations of $50 or more will be banned, and party secretaries will need to ensure money over the threshold has come from New Zealand donors. The Minister of Justice, Andrew Little, says there is an increasing risk of foreign influence in New Zealand politics.
The advice that the intelligence agencies gave to the Justice Committee is that, for example, it's not difficult under our laws for a foreign donation to be routed through a New Zealand company and make its way to a political party. That's why we've added in a due diligence requirement on party general secretaries to make sure that any of the donations they receive comply with the law.
The National Party will support the legislation, but they're not happy at the rate it will be passing through the House. They believe the government had a much more cynical motive for the bill being rushed through, to deflect from a poor poll result and allegations surrounding the New Zealand First Foundation. National Party leader Simon Bridges pressed the Prime Minister on the latter during question time.
Will her government's electoral law introduced today deal with the situation where foundations and trusts receive donations which are then provided to political parties for electoral purposes?
Actually, Mr Speaker, the question I got asked on the tolls was whether or not it would deal with the more recent foreign donation example of the National Party. The answer to that is actually that's a bit more complex.
ACT Party leader David Seymour was also critical of the bill.
By making it $50, it's going to be a nightmare for political parties to comply with, because every time you get a $51 donation, you've got to find out where the person lives. On the other hand, if it can't be complied with, if there's no real punishments for complying with it, and there won't be because it's not practical, we've achieved nothing but denuding our democracy by going into urgency, ironically excluding New Zealanders from having input through the Select Committee process.
Otago University law professor Andrew Geddes agreed the bill shouldn't be rushed through under urgency.
It really isn't clear at all to me why this couldn't have at least a very short time in front of a select committee so that New Zealand public could, have their say on these changes. I mean, they are New Zealand's electoral laws and they, ought to belong to the public. So best practice would be to allow some form of select committee scrutiny.
Andrew Geddes doesn't believe overseas donations are a major threat to New Zealand's political system, so the change hasn't achieved much. But Andrew Little is defending the rate the bill is passing through Parliament.
If it's going to have any meaningful effect, we have to have it in place for the beginning of next year, not partway through next year. If we don't prevent foreign donations as early as possible, then we run the risk that foreign donations will be made and they won't be captured.
Mr Little says today's legislation is just the first step to address the risk of foreign influence. He says the Electoral Act needs a major overhaul, but that work won't be able to start until after next year's election. From Parliament, for Checkpoint, ko Charlie Drever, DNA.
The police have confirmed the full details of 34 individuals were compromised in the gun buyback scheme, with another 500 having their names and addresses accessed. Personal information about the gun owners, such as names, addresses, contact numbers, firearms licence numbers and bank account details, were made available to dozens of firearms dealers through its guns buyback website. The police say a systems audit has confirmed there was only one login from a dealer with legitimate access. They've been in touch directly with that person, who's assured them that the information has not been used in any way, shape or form. But the Council of Licensed Firearm Owners insists at least 19 people accessed sensitive information. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
The police say the error was made by the private company German software provider SAP. As a result, a dealer was able to access and view details of gun owners after a software update caused the privacy breach. The dealer contacted police to let them know yesterday. The police say an update was initiated without their approval and SAP has admitted fault. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says the advice from the police about the extent of the breach has not changed.
I was advised this morning, again, that it was one individual who was able to access this information. Now, I've seen counter-suggestions in the media, and my expectation, of course, that will be worked through, but the reassurance I've had from the provider is that they can see who's accessed the information. They're still stating that it's been one individual.
Nationals leader Simon Bridges says there are still questions about it.
Is the Prime Minister right to talk about only one person having accessed this? Well, it seems to me from the little I've seen, the police can't even say that. Obviously, Colfo are saying something different as well.
The Police Minister Stuart Nash says if the council has any relevant information, it should pass it over.
I don't want to say that Colfo is wrong, but what I would urge them to do is if they do have more information or that contradicts this, please do get in touch with the police.
Nationals Police spokesperson Brett Hudson asked Mr Nash in Parliament what he was doing to protect the people involved.
What actions is he taking to ensure that firearms owners whose information may have been breached do not have that information used against them?
Mr Speaker, if that information is used against them or in any way which is illegal, then the police will be investigating this. There is a full investigation underway at this point in time.
Simon Bridges says the buyback has already been a fiasco and this will seriously compromise trust in the scheme. He says the buck stops with the Minister and Jacinda Ardern.
The Prime Minister who's trying to wash her hands, say not us, this is SAP. Well, it is her. This was a signature issue for her and for the Police Minister, and so far it's incredibly serious.
The Minister Stuart Nash says SAP has admitted fault and that's where the responsibility lies.
I'm not going to resign on this. There's a whole lot of work to do and we're only halfway through it and I want to see the job done.
So who should take responsibility for it?
Well, SAP has taken responsibility for it.
The police will be calling the 34 people who had their full details accessed and will also contact the rest to let them know what's happened. They say if anyone has participated in the buyback program and has not been contacted, it means their details have not been accessed. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
It's about 12 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. I asked a few minutes ago if you could let me know how many joints were in 14 grams of cannabis. Now, this is the maximum legal purchase amount per day that the government is proposing under the legislation that will go to the referendum next year. And a bunch of you have got in touch. Someone says 14 grams a day is heaps, man. No one needs that much. Crazy, way too much. I smoke every day and that would last at least a month. Someone says that 14 grams of weed is about 15 to 18 cigarettes, quite a bit, but depending on how fat your roll is. Another person has said that on average a person would roll 2 to 3 joints per gram. So for most recreational consumers, 14 grams is a week's supply. For modest social users, it could be about a month's supply. Another person says 14 grams, 20 to 30 joints, more than anyone could use in a day. I'd compare it to buying a few 20 packs of beer. Definitely not a daily dose for comparison, says Tim. Someone else has said the sale amounts offshore are much lower in countries like Holland. So wondering whether you think 14 grams is way too much and if we should look at revising that downwards. Get in touch. You can text me on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. A chicken farm in Auckland where 190,000 birds died did not proactively tell the authorities that anything had happened, and only did so after they were dobbed in. The deaths happened over the weekend, and the Ministry for Primary Industries is now investigating the farm, which supplies Tegel, to see if there were any breaches of animal welfare legislation. Animal welfare campaigners say the ministry must throw the book at them, and the deaths of hundreds of thousands of animals should not go unpunished, even if it was a mistake. Jordan Bond reports.
On Friday, almost 200,000 chickens either overheated or suffocated to death after a power outage cut the air supply to their barns. The farm north of Helensville, which supplies Tegel, is now under investigation by the Ministry for Primary Industries. Gary Orr, the ministry's compliance director, says that'll determine whether there were any breaches of animal welfare legislation.
If it's an accident, it's a tragic accident. If there is culpability and we can establish that, then we'll take appropriate action. But at this stage we are investigating. We have no idea where that investigation will lead.
Mr. Orr says this is death on an unprecedented scale. The ministry was told by someone else, not the company involved, which only provided information after the ministry sent them a please explain.
We were made aware of it through third party, and it was only after we were provided that information and reached out to the company that they then confirmed. So that's going to be part of another conversation we'll be having.
Tegel confirmed today it was a farm that they contract to grow chickens. Vector Energy says there was a 48-minute power outage at the property, which they believe was caused by animal contact. Deirdre Sims, spokesperson for Direct Animal Action, says no one should be able to kill hundreds of thousands of animals and get away with it.
It's absolutely disgusting, but unfortunately it's not surprising when you have companies like Tegel that cram thousands of chickens into these factory farm buildings. And Tegel absolutely need to be held accountable for this.
Ms Sims says New Zealanders should know the poor conditions chickens are kept in.
You've got tens of thousands of chickens crammed into a stifling hot building. It would have been horrendous for them, a terrible way to die, and it would have taken a number of hours.
Broiler chickens are bred for meat and ready for slaughter between 5 and 7 weeks. Chris Wilkinson from consultancy First Retail says we eat so much chicken that even with 200,000 being pulled out of the market, it shouldn't affect Christmas lunch.
It's unlikely to. This is just one of 4 big suppliers into the market. Many of them have contingent stocks at this time of the year, so it's unlikely to create too much of a challenge in terms of supply chain.
Countdown says Tegel has been in touch and it is not expecting any supply issues. The ministry says the company is cooperating with its investigation. Attempts to speak to the contractor were unsuccessful. For Checkpoint, Jordan Bond.
The Community and Voluntary Sector Minister hasn't read a damning report into the Hepatitis Foundation's extravagant spending and wasn't aware of her department's refusal to answer questions. RNZ revealed last week the foundation spent more than $128,000 on travel over 2 years for its board chairperson and paid for lavish dinners at top restaurants. Today, the charity's founder and the original complainant, Sandy Milne, referred the matter to the Attorney General. Following RNZ's stories, the charity called in a firm of accountants to review the regulator's findings, which it says contains inaccuracies the foundation has long contested. The foundation receives millions of dollars in funding from the Ministry of Health. Our political reporter Joe Moyer spoke to Minister Poto Williams and started by asking her whether it was acceptable for taxpayers to have to fund the audit.
That's speculative, so I'm not really going to comment on that. I'm going to wait and see what comes out of this before I make any comment on that.
Was it acceptable for charity services not to publish a report despite the investigator recommending to do so?
That is not part of their brief. They don't publish those reports as far as I know.
So is it acceptable then for it to take more than a year from when the report was completed for it to be made public, but only through an Official Information Act request?
I'm unsure of what the actual regulations are around that, but as far as I know, with it now becoming a matter for Hepatitis Foundation to conduct their own audit, I think that it's probably best for me not to make any further comment until we see.
Do you think that those who suffer from hepatitis deserve to know that that sort of behaviour was going on and that there was an investigation underway? Because for 4 years they knew nothing and they still didn't know anything a year after the report was completed.
I think we have to be clear about the role of charities regulation in this, and this is about regulating an organisation and for them to be, so that they know that they are following the processes that are put in place. It is then their decision about whether to register or deregister. And I think in this case, I think that we're all aware that the decision was to give the Hepatitis Foundation opportunities to make good on what was found during that process. Now that we're in a process where Hepatitis Foundation are reconsidering that, I think we should leave it until that work has been completed before we make any further comment.
Have you read the report?
No, I have not.
Why?
I just haven't read it yet.
So there's been constant media stories about lavish dinners at top Auckland restaurants using money that was meant for people suffering from hepatitis, and you haven't read the report.
The regulator made comments on that and made recommendations to the Hepatitis Foundation about that.
They haven't fronted anyone for an interview?
That's the Hepatitis Foundation? Well, that's over to them, that's not over to
Charity Services haven't fronted anyone for an interview?
Okay, well, I wasn't aware of that. So, thank you.
Is that good enough from a regulator when these sorts of things are coming out about taxpayers' money that was meant for people suffering from hepatitis? Is it good enough to not even front for an interview?
I will have to take that back to Charity Services, so I wasn't aware that they hadn't made any comment at all. Thank you.
And that was the Community and Voluntary Sector Minister Poto Williams speaking to political reporter Joe Moyer. And Auckland iwi is putting its hand up to buy part of the city's waterfront if Ports of Auckland operations are moved to Northland. Today, Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei released its plans to develop almost 100 hectares of land, including the Ports of Auckland and Key Park. The Central Auckland Hapu is welcoming talks of the port's move and is looking to form an iwi consortium to buy the land if it comes up for sale. John Boynton has more.
Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei is the ahika for the Auckland CBD, and in 1996 bought 20 hectares of land at Key Park for $44 million. The iwi fortune now stands around $1.5 billion, and it's putting its hand up to buy the land and foreshore Ports of Auckland currently sits on if it ever comes on the market. Its Deputy Chair, Ngāremu Blair, is excited by the current political environment.
Well, we used to own that part of the Waitemata. We want to own it again, and our money is as good as anyone else's, and we can lead a consortium of that scale to reacquire it again.
That consortium, Mr Blair says, could include iwi powerhouses Ngaitahu, Waikato Tainui and Tuaropaki. The current value of the land is estimated to be worth up to $6 billion.
We have initiated high-level discussions with other iwi who have large balance sheets who are interested in working with a Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei-led consortium, put together the type of money one would need to acquire such an asset.
The traditional name of the area is Te Toangaroa, which means the dragging of the waka. The Te Toangaroa proposed development would include an urban beach, cruise terminals, parks and community gardens and laneways. Ngāremu Blair says the development is about creating spaces which connect people back to the Waitemata harbour.
creating urban beaches where people can take a dip and a swim with their kids or take the suit off after work and dive into the Waitemata, where currently you really can't do that anywhere along our CBD waterfront.
Auckland University Associate Professor in Business Development Manuka Hinari says Māori have always shown interest in buying the ports of Auckland for exports.
When I first came to the University of Auckland Business School, there was discussion then about the port, and that was coming from people Waikato, Maniapoto, Tauranga and from North Auckland.
Although he says the future of the ports lies in tourism, something which could be lucrative for the new owners.
These large ports, such as Auckland, London, New York, they are attractions, beautiful waterways, lots of activities for people who can afford to come to New Zealand, have 2 or 3 weeks off, and they will spend money.
The decision on whether to move the ports of Auckland to Whangarei is expected to be made by a cabinet committee later this week. For Checkpoint, John Boynton.
Let's return to our earlier stories about the measles outbreak in Samoa and the story about the 15-month-old Samoan boy who was leaving from Auckland to go back to Samoa. His godfather said he was declined a vaccination for the child. A number of you got in touch asking whether it was perhaps a guardianship issue. Does the child need to be with a parent in order to get vaccinated? Can I take somebody else's child in with me, you are asking. But interestingly, we've had this in from a doctor who says the Ministry, the DHB and the Regional Public Health are all telling general practice different things. We have no excess measles vaccine in Wellington. We are only being supplied for named 15-month and 4-year-old children once a fortnight. We have nothing for adults, non-residents or travellers to Samoa. I can understand why a medical centre would not immunise a non-resident. We have not been told we are allowed to. Your guest saying all under 18s, no matter what citizenship, should be immunised is news to us.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Lei ātawa tēnei. The family of a Samoan toddler who was refused a measles vaccination in Auckland is fearful he will become infected now that he's returned to Samoa. The 15-month-old's family had been visiting New Zealand, but he was denied vaccination at an Auckland medical clinic because he didn't have a New Zealand passport. His godfather Mark Went told Checkpoint the family will be taking all the precautions they can to keep him safe.
He's right well within the age bracket of those who are dying at the moment, so basically he's on home detention when he gets back. We've already instructed our family to clean all the car up. We'll get him straight into the car and go straight home, and that's where he'll be until this all blows over.
Mark Went says he can't understand why his godson was refused vaccination. The Health Ministry is reminding doctors that anyone under 18 can get a free measles jab in New Zealand regardless of their citizenship. National spokesperson on drugs, Paula Bennett, says 14 grams of cannabis a day is a lot for a person to be consuming under proposed law changes unveiled today. The government has released its draft bill for cannabis legislation, which includes a minimum age of 20 and regulations regarding potency. Feedback is now being sought from other parties before a final bill is drawn up. Voters will then be asked to say yes or no to the legislation in the cannabis referendum at next year's election. Ms Bennett says the draft bill is ill thought out and lacking in detail for the public.
It doesn't go into what it means for drug driving, for police training. It doesn't talk about what the tax rate will be, what the levels of THC, and I think it's at risk of causing more harm.
Paula Bennett, the Justice Minister Andrew Little, says his aim is to have the final draft bill available by early next year. A man who shot dead a young father-to-be in South Auckland earlier this year has apologised in court for the pain he has caused. 21-year-old Semi Pilitati has been jailed for at least 10 years for killing 26-year-old Arthur Brown outside a block of shops in Māngere in the early hours of March the 10th. In the High Court in Auckland today, Justice Duffy sentenced him to life imprisonment with a minimum non-parole period of 10 years and issued him with a third strike warning. Before the sentence was delivered, Pilitati stood in the dock and addressed Mr Brown's family. He said he was sorry for the pain he had caused and hoped they would one day forgive him. The severe northerly storm that battered the Wellington region today has left a trail of damage. At the height of the storm, the capital's double-decker buses were ordered off the roads and citizens were advised not to travel unless absolutely necessary. Catherine Hutton reports.
Gusts of up to 150 kilometres an hour were recorded in parts of Wellington and up to 90 an hour in Auckland and Nelson. The fire service had about 40 weather-related call-outs since 7 o'clock this morning, responding to complaints about flooding, lifting roofs and fallen lines. Power was out to about 800 Upper Hutt homes for a time this afternoon. The Wellington City Council says it's dealt with about 25 trees toppled and several sets of traffic lights out of action, as well as slips in several suburbs. The Met Service says it expects the blustery winds to reduce by 6 o'clock. This is Catherine Hutton.
Store owners on the Lake Wanaka waterfront are on high alert as the lake rapidly rises. Heavy rain has been affecting lakes and rivers across Otago, and Met Service says more is on the way. In Wanaka, it's expected lake water could flow over Ardmore Street in the morning, and businesses are on standby to help the council with sandbagging. Luke Yates, who's a manager at the Racer's Edge shop in Ardmore Street, says the lake started to rise on Friday and it's now higher than he's ever seen it.
There isn't a beach left. There's normally, a nice shingly beach in Wanaka. The Wanaka tree is partially underwater, or the willows along the front are completely underwater. It's pretty touch and go right now, how quickly it's coming up, when it's going to get onto the road. So we're starting to get pretty concerned.
Luke Yates, the Queenstown Lakes District Council, has put its emergency operations team on standby. A large roadside scrub fire that flared up near Christchurch this afternoon is now out. Helicopters had to be called in, and Fire and Emergency have sent 16 fire engines to the blaze. State Highway 1 between Templeton and Rolleston was temporarily closed, but is now open again. The Foreign Minister has told Parliament he won't be calling in the Russian ambassador about comments made by Russia's Foreign Ministry spokesperson. While Maria Zakharova said the facts still needed verifying, she referred to the death of 7 children in Afghanistan in 2014 as a result of, quote, the New Zealand military's negligence in failing to properly clear landmines. National's Jerry Brownlee asked the Minister in St Peters if he'd call in the ambassador to make it clear those comments are unacceptable.
When they have left 30 million landmines that kill or maim 2,000 Afghans every year.
The reality is we will consider the member's request, and that maybe we'll have to overcome the neglect of 9 years before us where they said nothing. But we're not going to react to an apparatchik in the foreign services of Russia.
Winston Peters speaking in Parliament today. A crackdown by the Labour Inspectorate has led to a third chorus subcontractor being fined for employment breaches by the Employment Relations Authority. A1 Communication and its director Harold Hirschwa-Deo was ordered to pay $27,200 in penalties for repeatedly failing to provide basic employment records. Mr Deo is personally responsible for $8,000 of the fines. The authority found he tried to deceive and delay the Inspectorate's investigation, undermine the law and gain an unfair advantage over competitors. The Inspectorate has investigated 77 ultra-fast broadband subcontractors and taken compliance action against 69 of them. It's coming up to 6:30 The second cricket test between New Zealand and England in Hamilton has ended in a draw. The game was abandoned after rain stopped play on the final day today, giving the Black Caps a 1-0 series win. Ross Taylor and Kane Williamson both brought up centuries just before the rain washed out the final 2 sessions. That makes 5 consecutive test series wins on home soil for the Black Caps, who now head to Australia for 3 tests, with the first one starting on December the 12th.
Collectively, it was a really good effort. We know we've got a lot of cricket coming up over the ditch, and it's going to be a tough challenge, but a couple of good matches for us.
Black Caps captain Kane Williamson. Meanwhile, New Zealand Cricket has lodged a complaint with the police over the racial abuse directed at England player Jofra Archer near the end of the first test in Mount Maunganui. Chief Executive David White says that if the offender is identified, they will be trespassed from all of New Zealand's international cricket grounds for a lengthy period. World heavyweight champion Andy Ruiz Jr. believes his rematch with Anthony Joshua will be a harder fight than his victory in June, but says all the pressure is on the Britain ahead of their showdown in Saudi Arabia this weekend. Mexican-American Ruiz produced one of boxing's biggest upsets when he dethroned the previously undefeated world champion with a 7th round stoppage. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, episode 4 of White Silence looks at the aftermath of the Marne inquiry into the Erebus disaster 40 years ago. We have a window on the world of palm oil, and our toxicologist Leo Shep has the gas on ochlorobenzylidine malonitrile, a substance that's been getting quite a lot of use in Hong Kong recently. On Nights of me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Warnings and watches are enforced for heavy rain and northerly gales for parts of southern and central New Zealand. For the top half of the North Island, from Northland down to Taupo and Taumaranui, scattered showers turning to rain for a time with brief heavy falls and possible thunderstorms. Norwesterlies strong for a time, easing tonight. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Taihape and Wairarapa, a period of rain tonight, then becoming fine. Strong norwesterlies, gale in exposed parts of Taihape and Wairarapa. Taranaki, Whanganui, Manawatu, Horowhenua, Kapiti Coast and Wellington. A few showers turning to rain for a time. Northerly gales in exposed places easing by tonight. Nelson and Marlborough, rain with heavy falls, clearing tonight. Isolated showers tomorrow. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, periods of heavy rain with squally thunderstorms and hail. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, heavy rain and thunderstorms near the main divide. Occasional rain elsewhere, however mostly fine for Canterbury Plains and North Otago. Chatham Islands, occasional rain or drizzle, mostly fine tomorrow. RNZ National, it's coming up to 6:09.
Thanks, Susanna, and thanks for tuning in. This is Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. The Director General of Health, Dr. Ashley Bloomfield, says medical centres in New Zealand will be reminded all children under 18 should be vaccinated for measles, regardless of their citizenship. Earlier in the program, Checkpoint revealed a 15-month-old Samoan toddler had been denied a measles vaccine at an Auckland clinic because he did not have a New Zealand passport. Dr. Bloomfield is also warning people, especially children, not to travel to Samoa during the epidemic. It comes as the death toll rose today to 55 and a Samoan opposition MP called for a public inquiry. For more on that, let's go now live to our reporter Logan Church in Apia. Good evening, Logan. What does MP Onase Sapolo want from an inquiry?
Talofa, Lisa. Yes, well, what they want to know is why Samoa had such terribly low immunisation rates prior to this outbreak. Many who we've been speaking to here in Samoa have been looking to an event last year, which we've been discussing over the past few days in Savaihi, where 2 kids died as a result of having a botched MMR vaccination. And there is a real culture of fear among many people we've been speaking to when it comes to these vaccinations, regardless of the quite intense government campaign here in parts of the country at the moment. They're also drawing parallels to the 1918 influenza tragedy here in Samoa. And just to give you a little bit of background, what happened was a ship left the port of Auckland in New Zealand and arrived in Samoa with people who were sick with the pneumonic flu. When they arrived, they weren't quarantined, unlike when they went to other countries, and they were let onto the country. And what happened was 8,500 people died. That was about a quarter of the country at the time as a result of that. And the opposition are saying this government hasn't learnt from that tragedy. Now, you remember, Lisa, yesterday our Foreign Minister Winston Peters is saying it's too early to talk about what's caused this outbreak. However, here in Samoa, the opposition are asking those questions loudly.
So earlier in the program, we ran your story about the traditional Samoan healer who's been practicing for, 40 odd years. And we saw dozens of parents with their kids there packed into the room waiting to see her. We know that the government shut down an alternative healer who was selling Kangen water on Friday for breaching rules about public gatherings. So why is this particular healer being allowed to continue operating?
Well, we're still trying to seek exact answers from the authorities on this, but the main thing that the government are really not happy about at the moment are people saying they have an alternative treatment to measles, as in they're saying to people, you don't need the vaccine, you can come to me and I can fix it, potentially for a fee. That's not what this healer is doing. She is instead making it very clear that she is treating the symptoms that these kids are coming with. What we're not so sure about is the current declaration, the state of emergency, where the kids can't gather in Samoa at the moment. And it's actually really interesting because this clinic is on one of the main roads in Samoa, and you can see there's massive groups of kids outside. You can see that from the road, and I was noticing even just driving along that plenty of police cars are driving up and down the road. So it's sort of yet to be seen exactly how this healer could be impacted by the government's rules and cracking down on those who I guess are taking a different approach than what the government's wanting to achieve here.
So the government shutdown is set for Thursday and Friday. What can we expect to happen?
Yes, well, with the exception of the power and water authorities, all government employees and resources will be funnelled into that mass immunisation program that's been ongoing in Samoa for several weeks now. Now, they won't necessarily be out with needles vaccinating people. That will be left to the experts, but they will be filling the other important tasks around that. Some of them will be drivers, others will be data specialists. Those people are recording the number of vaccines that have been given and also recording who's left to go. Some of them will also be working in the call centre. We're hearing people are calling 999, which is the number here, to get more information. So they will be getting hold of the phones and helping out there. Government cars and vehicles will also be used to transport vaccination teams all over Samoa to the villages and towns all over the country. We heard today that the mobile vaccination unit number is now at 50. That is likely to rise further as the government continues and ramps up its efforts to get as much of this country vaccinated as possible. We also got the latest figures on that critical age group, that being 6 months to 4 years old, in regards to how many of them have been immunised. Now, the government today said 67% of 6 months to 4 year olds have been immunised, but you have to turn that number on its head, which reveals that a third of that age group, this critical age group, have not been vaccinated and are not immunised, and they are sadly well overrepresented in that death toll, which now sits at 55.
Thanks, Logan. That's Logan Church joining us from Apia. National says the government's foreign donation ban will fall well short of what's needed, but it's still supporting the bill. The legislation to ban any foreign donations over $50 is being introduced under urgency and before the Justice Select Committee has made its recommendations on how to address the risk of foreign influence in New Zealand elections. The bill will also put the onus on party secretaries and candidates to take reasonable steps to make sure donations are not from foreign sources. I spoke to National spokesperson for electoral law, Nick Smith, who explained why he was sitting on a plane in Nelson and not in the House of Parliament at this vital time for legislation he's been calling for.
Well, many flights around the country have been delayed, although it's been extra frustrating being delayed by flights at the same time as electoral law spokesperson. The government is proposing to both introduce and pass through all stages, and it just illustrates how shonky the process around these changes are.
So why the rush? Why does this need to be addressed under urgency?
Well, there's no good reason at all. I gave a speech at the beginning of the year saying, look, there is this problem of increased foreign interference by powers in elections. We need to protect our democracy against it. One of those areas is the issue of foreign donations, and we should look to tighten that law up. My problem is doing it under urgency, doing it when you've got a select committee process that's underway, looking in huge detail at these issues, and doing it in a way in which is not allowing the Electoral Commission or any of the experts to ensure it is robust. It's very easy to set up a trust or a company or some other way to get around the new limit of $50 that's proposed in this bill. And so it's not particularly robust. This to me looks like an exercise in politics from a government that's under real pressure with the scandal that's erupted around the New Zealand First Foundation, rather than being a serious attempt to protect New Zealand's democracy and make our rules fairer.
So, two things there. Would you rather they waited until the Select Committee reports its findings proper?
That would be absolutely sensible. We've debated the very detail of these issues, including how you can have shelf companies and trust to get around it, and come to some pretty good recommendations around how that can be resolved. So they're preempting that process And then secondly, there's the issue of it's just one element of risk around foreign interference. If we're really serious about dealing with these risks, we need to do so in a more comprehensive way.
Okay, so do you fear that this will drive it further underground? Because as you point out, you could still channel this money through, well, a New Zealand incorporated company. You could give a suitcase of cash to a New Zealand resident and ask them to filter it through political parties. There are ways and means to get around this, isn't there?
Well, I think it's certainly deficient law. It's law that's driven by politics rather than by a really genuine attempt to make our law robust and our democracy as fair as possible. There are some anti-prevention measures. So if people do use trusts or companies, there is some limited powers for the Electoral Commission to check it. But as you rightly point out, nobody can pretend that this bill is a protection against foreign money influencing New Zealand politics. You would have to have a far more robust law than this to overcome that problem.
So just to be clear, would the National Party still be able to receive a $150,000 donation from the Inner Mongolia Riders company under this law or not?
Well, I don't want to get into the detail of that particular donation or any other of the issues with other parties. The key issue is whether it is a New Zealand citizen or a resident. What National is clear about is that we want electoral laws that are fair, that are robust. And the one thing in that case is at least there was a disclosure so people can see what's there. One of the issues in this whole realm is making sure that you've got the disinfectant of sunlight so people can see those donations. A number of countries have different rules around whether it's a trading company in New Zealand or what those different rules are around how they might be able to donate. For instance, you've got a company like Fletcher's, a very New Zealand company, but actually has a majority of foreign investors. You need to resolve those sorts of details if you're going to do this law robustly.
So why do you think it is being rushed through under urgency if, in your view, there is no need for that?
The reason it's being rushed is a political reaction by a government that's been panicked by both polls, wanting to create a distraction and also feeling very sensitive about the issues that have been raised by the media around New Zealand First and their foundation.
So should we get rid of foundations altogether? I mean, National has one.
National does have a foundation. Every donation that goes into it is considered as a donation to the National Party and is disclosed. Any expenditure that's made by the foundation is also disclosed.
So hang on, it's okay for the National Party to operate through donations through a foundation, but not for New Zealand First? So should we get rid of them altogether or not?
No, let's be clear, Lisa, and it's very difficult when I'm in a plane that I'm getting instructions to close off
Understand.
for the host is. But the foundation that National has is for the purposes of having a robust long-term fund to support the party. The key feature, though, is that every donation into that foundation is disclosed as a donation to the party. That is different to what New Zealand First has done. It is the disclosure requirement that is really important to protecting the integrity of our democracy.
I know you are going to have to go soon. Despite all your concerns, you're going to support this, aren't you?
Well, we want to make plain, as I did in a speech in January, that we think the rules around foreign donations need to be tightened, but it needs to be done in a robust and a considered way. You need to have both the Electoral Commission and electoral experts comment on it. In my view, this is being done for politics, not for the reasons of actually making our democracy stronger.
But in principle, Andrew Little has got this right.
No, we're saying that we are voting for this legislation because the rules need to be tightened. But we're actually saying that this legislation has major holes within it.
Well, he's putting this legislation forward because he believes the rules need to be tightened too. So you're on the same page there, aren't you?
Well, certainly National and Labor is of a view the rules need to be tightened. That is a good thing. The disappointment I have is on a number of occasions I've personally offered to Andrew Little to work with him. Every single electoral bill under the last government was progressed on a cross-party basis by the previous Ministers of Justice. This is now the fourth bill that's been done with no consultation, and that, in my view, is just not a good way in which to do our electoral laws, particularly when we have no constitutional wider protection. This is simply the government of the day using its majority to ram legislation through rather than really good process around electoral law.
And that's National's electoral law spokesperson Nick Smith. It is almost 23 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The urgency of upgrading Wellington's earthquake resilience has been laid bare in a new report. The Lifeline's Regional Resilience Project warns Wellington could be without electricity for up to 6 months if a major earthquake were to happen at current levels of resilience. But it says by investing in such projects now, when the eventual earthquake does hit, the damage won't be as consequential. Harry Locke has this report.
If a 7.5 magnitude earthquake were to hit Wellington, essential infrastructure would shut down. Electricity off for up to 6 months, and some roads blocked for 90 days. Today's report predicts the overall cost to national GDP would exceed $16 billion, and it would take the capital longer to recover than Christchurch did after the earthquakes. The report sets out a plan for how to reduce that fallout and improve the city's resilience. Wellington City Council engineer Derek Baxter says the advocacy for the integration of organisations is crucial.
Up until now, each utility provider's done their own planning, but what this report has been able to do is look at all those interdependencies and work out where the critical places for the initial investment should be.
Interdependencies look at the reliance of different utilities and organisations upon one another. For example, Mr Baxter says a super-resilient water network will be rendered practically useless if the electricity network to power the pumping stations is out of action.
This report is really about how to target the investment first up. We're all needing to prioritise our investment, and this helps us to identify where you would prioritise first.
It details $3.9 billion worth of individual projects that should be undertaken to improve resilience. With electricity, resilience hinges upon reducing the dependency on the Central Park substation, which currently has around 45,000 connections, including Parliament. The report recommends building a second station in the next 7 years, which the boss of Wellington Electricity, Greg Skelton, says they're working on.
Our view is it's a lot of eggs in one basket. Kind of single mode of failure of a big supply point means that you've got a lot of people who will have to wait a fairly long period of time without really having a backup facility to actually put some form of supply while the other supply point was being repaired or fixed.
Chair of the Regional Council, Darren Ponter, says he sees their role as largely acting as an intermediary between agencies to turn these projects into a reality. He says progress is already well underway.
A lot of the projects that you see in the Lifelines work are things that are already in the pipeline. The useful aspect of the Lifelines work is it's brought all of that stuff together.
The report's timeline connects a whole host of projects that span across local government, central government and independent agencies. While there will be no organisation overseeing progress, those involved hope the report will provide a framework each agency involved can look to when making plans. For Checkpoint, Harry Locke.
And finally tonight, visitors of Moscow's art residence can now sit on wads of cash at a new art installation, a throne stuffed with $1 million. Mia Wormsley reports.
Visitors to a Moscow museum are being given the opportunity to sit on $1 million. The installation at the capital's art residence is a throne made up of 2.5-inch thick layers of bulletproof glass and stuffed full of cash. The half-ton collaboration was cooked up by Russian Forbes rich list billionaire entrepreneur Igor Rybakov and Russian pop artist Alexei Sergeyenko.
All the projects I do, I already have around several hundred. I've been making art projects since the age of 8. They have some sort of influence on people and are useful in some way. This project is useful in that I'm giving people the opportunity to talk about money, think about money, and to start earning more. I want there to be more rich people in our country and for our country to be richer.
And it seems some people are easily convinced. Take fashion blogger Evgenia.
When I sat on the throne as a girl, I like sitting on thrones anyway, I really felt this energy, even more so because Igor Rybakov was standing next to me. He was smiling and radiating positive vibes, and of course, seeing all this, I also tasted this energy of success. I don't know whether it will make a difference or not, but I can say that I'm feeling positive. I can't stop smiling, and I hope, like Igor Rybakov said, you need to open open your chakra, and I did this today.
Okay, we've got a lot of feedback from you all, lots of it on cannabis, so let's get to some of it. This is on the 14-gram purchase limit that is being proposed as a daily amount that you could buy. A lot of you getting in touch to say to me, just because you can buy 14 grams doesn't mean you have to use it all in one day. Point taken. This person says 14 grams sounds like a lot per day, but this is how much you can have on hand. That doesn't mean you're going to smoke 14 grams a day. Some people buy enough smoke for a week or a month, depending on when they are paid. Other person says the limit set for cannabis isn't intended to be smoked on the day. It's convenient to buy occasionally, not every few days. If it's legal, one should be able to buy enough to last a few weeks, say 28 grams. And this other person says, not everyone wants to go to the retail store every week. Do you buy toilet paper by the roll? And also Mike has got in touch with a well-considered, rather lengthy email. I'm not going to be able to get through all of it, but I'll hopefully get to your main points, Mike. Mike says that he's used cannabis for most of his adult life, a PTSD sufferer who's found it the only effective medicine which helps me manage my illness safely. And a person who strongly believes in personal management of one's own well-being. I think the limit is a great way to keep Winnie happy. And he says, to put it in perspective, think of the limit of how much sugar, tobacco, alcohol, firearms or ammunition which someone can buy in one day. Consider also the limit to how much over-the-counter medication a person can purchase. How often a reasonable person would want to visit the chemist to buy, for example, paracetamol or antihistamines. Cannabis is a plant which can provide a range of benefits through a range of methods of administration. Talking about how many joints someone can roll is a very narrow discussion. He goes on to say, I think the referendum is a really dumb idea because it puts the future of my well-being in the hands of an uneducated community who will be heavily influenced by sensational media coverage and biased supposition of a community who've lived under a veil of illegality decades. That's a hard one to get your mouth around. The government should just pass the bill into law, he says, through the normal democratic process and stop trying to keep the Conservative coalition partner happy. And this one, before we go on the chooks, someone has got in touch, Brian, and he says, what's happened to the chooks? Are they on special? Brian, behave. We're back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Director-General of Health is promising to make sure no one under 18 is denied the measles vaccine, regardless of where they come from, following an Auckland clinic's refusal to vaccinate a toddler on his way home to Samoa. National spokesperson on drugs, Paula Bennett, is questioning the daily amount of cannabis allowed under proposed law changes unveiled today. Auckland iwi are lining up to buy and develop Port of Auckland land if operations are moved to Northland. And lake levels at Wanaka and Queenstown are causing concern tonight with more heavy rain predicted and lakefront streets expected to be underwater overnight. Those are the headlines. Our next news is at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
Unfortunately, the case fatality rate of measles is much higher than many people realize.
Live with local, national and international stories as they happen.
An individual had been able to access the information